We hope you enjoy this episode of the Modern Divorce Podcast. But first, an important message for our listeners.
Embarking on a new chapter? Zach Nutzman of the Darwin Wall team at Realty One Group is your go-to real estate expert in Arizona, specializing in guiding couples and families through their real estate needs while experiencing a divorce. Modern Law's trusted partner, Zach, brings expertise, confidence, and compassion to your real estate journey. Let him help you navigate this challenging time. Zach Nutzman, your modern solution in real estate. Hello and welcome to another special edition of the Modern Divorce Podcast, where we are interviewing local candidates. And today we are with Noah Mundt, candidate for town council in Gilbert. Hello.
Yes. Hello, Billy. It's great to be on the show.
Yeah.
Longtime fan, first time caller, long time listener. Yeah.
So we spoke a little while ago on my Instagram Live when you were in the midst of having your signatures challenge. You weren't sure if you were going to get on the ballot.
Yeah, it was a very tense situation. I had faith that, we would work it out and that it would not be an issue. However, as anyone who's ever been in any kind of a court knows, there is that trepidation that comes with it at any given time. So, when we talked last, that was right in the middle of, I think I had the final court date a few days after that. But the judge did end up dismissing it, and we're on the ballot. So we're happy to keep moving along with that.
Yeah, congratulations. So I definitely have questions about that, but I also want the viewers to kind of get to know you. And then if we've got time, we can talk about some goon stuff because that's hot too.
Yeah.
Let me
No doubt.
first start by asking, there are 2 seats open on council right now, correct?
Correct.
And how many candidates are running for those 2 seats?
4 have their signatures in, yes.
Okay. And so will the top 2 be in, or are there certain districts within Gilbert?
No, it's the top 2. Gilbert is a nonpartisan full town race, so everybody votes for those 2 seats, regardless of which portion of the town you live in.
Okay. So is there a primary?
Yes, and in fact, that's a very important distinction about the way that, especially in Arizona and local elections, because of the way the primary system is set up, the council will, in essence, be determined in the primary, which is happening July 30th. And I say that, more forcefully, I think, and trying to pound that point home, because if you are not a registered Republican or Democrat and have not already requested a ballot, you won't even get one. And so in essence, there's a massive amount of people who, through no fault of their own, may just not even end up getting to choose their council, because there's 4 people in 2 seats. And the way the math works is there's some rule of 50% plus 1, which in essence means it will 100%, 99.9% be determined in the primary unless there's a 3-way tie of exact amounts of votes of people. Then it would go to the November general election. And I say that too because voter apathy happens and people, don't always recognize when the primaries are happening. And I try to point out this year is it's highly important to notice it because they also moved it up a full week.
Wow.
It was in August originally, and then we had to do our signatures a week earlier too. And that all ties into when the governor had to adjust to allow time if there was a election challenge, that there would be time from the legislative point to be able to actually deal with that.
So I am a registered independent, and sitting on my kitchen table is something I got in the mail that said request a ballot. And I haven't looked closely, but I'm fairly confident that that is exactly what you're talking about. And Natalie D. Bernardo said something to the same effect. So if we independents want to vote,
right,
for our local elections, and I think there's less apathy now maybe than there has been in the past. If you want to vote in these local elections, they're really actually taking place in July. That is crucial for people to know.
Yeah, especially, because July here in Arizona, a lot of people take their vacations. School does start a little bit earlier for most schools, so you're back by the end of July. So the 30th, you should be here. But if, the beauty is if you have a mail-in, you can deal with this much earlier, but the request you should make ASAP, I would suggest. Yeah.
I will do that. I will absolutely do that. And I hope that other people do as well. All right. So Now, let's back up. I know that you have some experience with the town of Gilbert in the planning commission, correct?
Correct. Yes,
Okay.
I've been on the planning commission, I think five in some odd, almost 6 years. I'm currently the chairman. And prior to that, I was on a board and then became president of the Municipal Property Corporation for the water, which is a kind of quasi-governmental organization that allows for greater bonding capacity when you're doing large-scale water infrastructure projects.
Well, I'm happy that you know something about the water because people have questions about the water in Gilbert. And
Yeah.
I haven't been able to get them answered. So you are going to have to answer that for us. What do you do in addition to your work with Gilbert?
I'm currently an engineer, a senior engineer at SRP, and I work in the electrical vehicles, customer programs, product development. So in essence, and I also do some work in energy efficiency with the programs there and manage some of those. But a big portion of what I do there is working on trying to establish means with which to work with the community as the electricity load is going to double or triple over the next 5 to 10 years, causing a extreme amount of infrastructure requirements if we aren't able to find ways to do bi-directional charging and additional battery capacity, microgrids and the like.
Well, that's really important. And I think it's really important.
Yes.
Definitely something that you bring to the table to council. I don't know that
Yeah.
there are any other electrical engineers in leadership, are there?
No, I know the only other engineer, Young Kaprowski, she's a civil engineer, but she works primarily, I think, in transportation, which is highly important for a town as well. But
Absolutely.
I also have worked years in water, so I've done a lot of work with utilities, from energy efficiency, large industrial water energy efficiency, and things like that. And I've written a number of op-eds that people can. That's what I always say when I'm running. I say, Google me and all of the candidates, so you can see. Because you can put whatever you want on a website. I created it myself. I mean, I can put that I'm a billionaire. It doesn't matter. So I always encourage people to look it up and see what other things may come up in the algorithm, which if you like technical documents, you might find some of those in mine.
Got it. Okay. So how long have you lived in Gilbert?
14, a little over 14 years.
Okay. And where did you come from?
Originally from just outside of Green Bay, Wisconsin. So, that's one of the things I always said was that Gilbert has, people sometimes pick on people from the Midwest and Wisconsin, especially, as being overtly nice. I know Charlie Berry's the comedian. Many of the listeners have probably seen him, and he's like, "Oh yeah, move her." There is some of that dialect that is hilarious. I agree. I have, uncles and aunts that speak like that, but the niceness is actually true. People wave. My dad will suddenly just be out on his John Deere lawnmower mowing the neighbor's yard just because he thought, oh, well, they might need help. But Gilbert has that same kind of feel on a much larger scale, being that there's, 280 to 300,000 people here now. But I still get that feeling, and that's what I love about Gilbert.
Mm-hmm. Do you have children?
I do. 3, 2 in elementary school and a daughter that's a senior in high school, getting ready to go to Colorado State up in Fort Collins next year.
Wow. Very cool. Very cool. And what high school did your daughter go to, or does your daughter go to?
Perry, so right in the middle of all of the
Right in the middle of the drama. Yeah.
Mhm.
Well, I do want to talk about the drama, but I also want to talk about water. People have
Yeah.
big concerns about water, and they probably should have concerns about electricity. So first, what's going on with water and the water bills?
So one of the biggest reasons that the water bills will be going up, and I'll just use a very basic example. My parents being from Green Bay, Wisconsin, their water bill is 3 times what mine is, and they happen to live right on the largest freshwater source that exists in the free world. And so we have been very spoiled here. And so the essence, I think, is that what needs to happen is more of a tiered approach to, if you're using well more water than other people, that those costs should go up more. And so that the average person who does the right thing, tries to minimize, the length of a shower, doesn't just leave sprinklers running, maybe takes the grass, and puts in a desert scape, those people should not have to be paying more. I think that part of what the attempt is to try to make it so that there is a cost incentive to preserve water. And that's the intent. Now, how the public has perceived that and how any individual actually has experienced that, I don't want to speak to. But the intent was to utilize rates in order to try to limit the amount of water used. And the reason for that, so we have a number of allocations. There's your CAP water, and you have your I forget the name of the other canal, but CAP and SRP. That's right.
What's
that was funny.
CAP?
It's what does CAP stand for? Wow, I'm drawing a complete blank. But the CAP is it's the canal that runs all the way down from the Hoover Dam. So Lake Powell, Lake Mead, that thing you would hear about, the levels have dropped so far and they're going to raise the conditions from a level drought up, and that is then going to mean a drop in the allocation for certain Western states who are in that agreement, Arizona being one of them. And so this water that comes in these canals is allocated out to all of the different cities, tribal organizations, and agricultural users. And if then that starts to get cut, there's certain areas that either everyone has to agree on, or there's lower tiers of people that have to take those cuts. And why it's important to understand is that if those waters get cut, you then have to go and rely on wells. Now we've done a lot of recharge. So from a vantage point of actually running out of water, we are in the desert, so it's always critical to be saving. But with the amount of savings, and in the early, 1980, the department ADEQ had set up a standard for, any development that happens has to have a 100-year supply of water shown. There was some gaming of that system across in different parts of the state, but for the most part, if through prudent leadership, most of the municipalities in the valley have set their zoning ordinances so that if anyone's coming in building commercial, residential, multifamily, whatever it is, the water allocation that's coming from the municipal plants has to be able to show that there is a 100-year supply of that. But so back to why it matters. If we run out and we have to cut down the amount coming through these canals, you then have to go into the wells. And as you start to deplete the wells, they get deeper. The deeper they go, the further you have to lift the water, the more energy you use. Hence, you end up in this sick budgetary loop where you try to add more, but then it ends up costing more, and then you end up charging. And on the outward appearance, it seems as though it's inefficiently running and you don't know what you're doing, but it's really just trying to catch a falling knife, unless you're able to try to put a stopgap into it by preserving and limiting the amount of water people use. I hope that makes sense. I don't want to get too engineering on you.
No, it does make sense. But it doesn't seem like simply raising water bills is going to actually impact usage. Maybe I'm wrong.
Well, that's where I say that I think that if right now it has not established a sufficient tier system to where the costs associated with higher and higher use continue to go up more and more on an escalating scale. In essence, that's what you want to have happen. You want to have somebody that uses the average amount of water that a family of 4 uses, not experience a significant amount of increase. But the person that uses 5x that, they will experience a massive increase because there's no reason to be doing all of that use. And that cost, theoretically, in some people's case, they won't care. I mean, some people will just be like, oh, that costs more. Okay.
Right.
So mostly, you try to do this in a sense that the people who are impacted are people who are, in essence, using more than they necessarily need to. And hence, you can take a percentage, even if 10 or 20% of those people then adjust their means, you can get a reduction in the amount of water used.
Sure. Or the money that you need in order to drill down into the well. That makes a lot of sense. But right now there is not a tiered system. It's just a flat rate.
Yeah. Well, and I think that this last rate, that there is some tiers to it, but I don't think that they're quite as aggressive, because this gets simply into the fact of public policy and the attempt to, if you say, okay, we're going to put this tiered system in, that somebody may just focus in on, they're raising this by hundreds of dollars, and then you end up in a mess. And it's a lot of it, I think, is just about the education. I think Gilbert Water's done a great job but it still continues to need to be a community effort of outreach and helping to understand how it is a community effort. It should be looked at as we have spent a lot of money and time putting together very robust water and wastewater treatment systems that help to preserve our community for both ourselves and future economic development. And in doing so, there are costs to operate these. Another thing that as the water's coming down off the mountains in Flagstaff and areas like that, we end up with a lot of additional debris from wildfires. So the wildfires actually have a massive impact because by that water coming down, being full of debris, it goes to the treatment plants. The treatment plants on their influent are not capable of dealing with that much silt and other debris. And hence they end up having to pay more to clean that and scrub that out. And then, costs go up in those regards too. So there's some of these things that are just out of the control. Standard operation and maintenance isn't even enough to, scale what it is sometimes. And not to mention, we were doing, this massive North Water plant. The costs associated with that due to the supply chain issues after COVID increased dramatically. Just to be able to get the same equipment that we had spec'd out, in the 2018. So there's a lot of things that have happened that have caused that. And, to an average person, it seems like everywhere you turn, you're paying more. And I completely understand that.
Right.
I mean, I take the family to Wendy's and get Happy Meals and myself a sandwich, and they're like, yeah, $53. And I'm thinking, what?
You gotta go to In-N-Out.
I'm like, I didn't order for the 3 cars behind me too, did I? But yeah, so it's hard, and that's the thing. People are feeling the squeeze, and it's in a town where you're in a very delicate balance between taxes, which is the only source of income, and then, and water rates are the only other, wastewater and water are the only portions of a town that actually generate revenue. And by revenue, it means generate something with the ability to then pay for their maintenance and everything else. Everything else is tax-based. And we in Gilbert have enjoyed low taxes. There's no secondary property tax that a lot of other towns have or cities have. And so it all comes from business sales tax. And then we just lost, to the state, we just lost the rental sales tax. That's then going to go up to there. So that's going to cause another hit. And, so that has to then be cut out of a department or augmented in some way. And so that's where the hard part is that about being now a politician, where I'm the cliche guy that's not a politician, but now I am. But there's hard decisions that have to be made. And for the most part, a lot of people would like to just come on and parade around and say, I'm going to do everything like this, and part of what I think the people of Gilbert want, just like the people across the country, is a lot more transparency of what's actually going on and the truth. Blowing smoke, it only goes so far. And then eventually you end up where you're being able to vilify people when in reality, there was no reason to, if you had just said, here's why this is happening on the outset.
Well, I agree completely that part of Gilbert's crisis of faith that is currently happening with the public does come from communication. Just a lack of communication, or not enough communication, or communication that seems contradictory or incomplete. And so then the public is left feeling angry and then making people into villains. So how would you communicate differently?
For myself, I try to, when I go to talk at different types of events and things like that, I try to bring my perspective and do it that way. From a digital vantage point, I think we could be doing a significant amount more to help people understand, even let's take planning and zoning, for instance. There's a notification period. You have to have it 10 days or 2 weeks. You have to put up a sign that has letters of a certain size on to tell you, oh, you're going to put this here. There's going to be a public meeting. You have to send letters out to a certain radius of people around. And a lot of those things, when citizens will come in, they'll feel as though there's some kind of a shell game happening, when in reality, it's the exact part of the system. And by all means, if there's a better way, which I think there may be in the digital environment, that we can actually notify and help people to understand these things, I think that's it. And I think by leveraging technology, would be kind of one of the first things I would want to do, is by being able to, we have the digital media that's been in the news a lot too, for people, people that don't like that and that they were messaging, leaning one way and having, controlling different parts of the organization, their communications, which, I think that's something that was brought up, rectified, but the idea that is there value in digital communication, digital government in 2024? Yeah. And it's a matter of how do we deploy those resources in a way that helps citizens understand what's going on, what's important. I think about it like there's that video that a lot of people may have seen about I'm a bill, and it goes through how a bill goes through Congress, and it's this cartoon with the little bill dancing around. We watched it, back in the 90s when I was in high school. We watched that in a civics class. But, those types of things where you can kind of illustrate, here's what this is, here's why this is like this, here's what these water rates do, here's kind of an example of a family, and giving out some of those examples as to how that should actually look, what would be helpful. And the best and most efficient, cost-effective way to do that is through a digital media.
I totally agree. Hey there, co-parents. It's Billy Tarasio with Modern Law, and let me tell you about our Family Wizard, our preferred co-parenting app. It's a game changer. I use it myself. With features like documented calls, secured messaging, shared calendars, and more, our Family Wizard makes co-parenting smoother than ever. Trust me, I've seen the difference that it can make. Join the over 1 million parents and family law professionals who trust our Family Wizard to make co-parenting easier. Ready to take some stress out of co-parenting? Head to ourfamilywizard.com/modern law. Like, what if the town of Gilbert had a weekly podcast show where you answered the public's questions and the public was free to send in their emails and you just answered the questions? Like, how easy would that be?
And that's one thing that I think a lot of people have felt, that there is a lack of response. And some of this deals in where people in the organization may have been told by the legal, hey, you can't comment on this or that. And whether or not that was the right route, I don't know. I particularly think in certain cases, you're not admitting any guilt just by saying, yeah, this is a tough situation. I completely agree that we need to figure this out as a community.
It would have been easy, right?
Right, and that's how I see it, and I think that's where, nothing against lawyers, but insurance companies and lawyers have taken the reins on controlling to where people don't even know what they can do or say, and then they just go, well, let's imagine the worst case scenario and then plan against that. And what you end up with then is almost 100% of the time it's say nothing. And
well,
I
lawyers are risk adverse. It's our job to tell people, to give them the most conservative advice, but the best clients are those who push back and ask why, what is the rule, and really can weigh the risk. And so we need leaders that are willing to do that for us and not just kind of parrot lines that don't give us information.
Right. No, I agree. And I think that's something that, it's not just Gilbert, but I think Gilbert, is a microcosm of, and even in an accelerated fashion of what that needs to happen. That a lot of people have woken up to what's happening. And, the goons was one thing that brought that out, among other things. But that's been a very big topic that people are suddenly saying, wait a minute, what is this? How is this happening? And that, and it could, at the end of the day, it can come up in police processes, things like that. I completely understand. I always use the example in that case of, well, if there was just a rogue cop out there only looking at Instagram videos and chasing down high schoolers, and then, they're at their weekly meeting and they're like, hey, what did you do, Smith? And he's like, well, no, I didn't do any of that stuff you wanted me to. I'm out here chasing down this Instagram. That'd be a waste of taxpayers' money. And so on the other accord, how are you not seeing this? And then you get into what actually is the detail of when do you file charges? Is it, if nobody comes in and says, hey, I am the victim of a crime, and there's some of those semantics. That being said, are there things that could be done? Yeah. And are there ways that you could try to help the community understand that there are people there to help? Yeah.
Whatever we were doing 2 years ago, we got to come up with something different. That's the bottom line. we have to do something different. We're going to have to be more proactive and look at this thing that's happening, and it's not over. I don't know if you're seeing, it's just not over. There was this
Yeah, no, I saw
huge
the Republic's
incident.
article that, detailed that there was, 95 incidents of, some form of an assault, and there's been 20 of those have had, some sort of an arrest or something associated. So, there's definitely a massive gap there.
And at Eastmark, like in the last week, there were drive-by shootings of teens and huge fights, like huge, big group fights in Eastmark. Now, I know that's Mesa, but like the problem isn't going to go away. It wasn't unique to these children, these
Right.
goons, these boys that have been arrested. Like it's a big problem. And
Right.
what happened is, I think when we started paying attention and peeling back the layers, we were like, okay, well, we have to look at everything. We have to look at the schools. We have to look at government. We have to look at our ordinances. And so, yeah, you have a community that's engaged and woken up, and they want to be involved and they want answers.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think rightfully so. I mean, I think that there has to be, I'm a person of, I completely agree that on any kind of a board or panel that you're on, that the dissenting opinion is very healthy. You need to have somebody that is a devil's advocate that pushes it, because that's how you keep yourself centered on exactly where you're going and not myopically focused on whatever it is that's currently in, the tunnel vision of your thought process.
Sure.
And so I also am a firm believer in that if that dissenting opinion comes in, we shouldn't try to shun it. We should, acknowledge it and actually embrace it, so that we're able to say, okay, well, if in fact the question can be answered by processes or anything like that, just say that. Say what the answer is, and I think that's what a lot of people are saying, that are feeling. They're feeling as though, well, if in fact this makes sense, then just explain that part.
Right.
And I don't know that explanation has been forthright.
No. Yesterday was particularly confusing. The Gilbert PD, along with other agencies, came out and said that they have classified the Gilbert Goons as a gang, and that there's a second gang, Jack Boy Mafia.
Yeah.
But they also said that none of the crimes that had been committed were in furtherance of the gang. And that has left the community just dumbfounded.
I have to fully admit, I don't understand that at all. So
Okay.
I'm dumbfounded as well.
Okay.
Hearing, okay, these guys are a street gang, but it was like a hybrid, or there was another coined term to it. It was like a loose, there was something else, but it's like, okay, they are. What does that mean? Well, nothing. It's almost like in Spaceballs when he says, I'm your roommate's cousin's father's brother's, third cousin. And he's like, what does that make us? Absolutely nothing. That's how I felt. I'm like, oh, there's all this information. What does it mean? Well, nothing.
Right.
So, yeah, and I think people, it especially given the time that's been put into this, and the amount of news that's covered it, the amount of people that are asking questions, talking about it, to come out and have that, it doesn't make sense. And I'm sure that at some level it does. I wish I understood. I really do.
There's got to be something, but it just hasn't been explained. So
yeah,
communication failures do seem to be the theme of issues, which is always the case. Communication's hard.
Yeah.
Let's talk about energy.
Okay.
Do we have a risk of our power grid going down?
Well, there's always a risk of that. You build redundancy into the system, and you try to have smaller microgrid areas where you're able to control if that's happening. One of the things that we have here in Arizona and in Gilbert is the fact that we have a large base load capacity, which comes from a nuclear power plant, Palo Verde, that a base load is kind of how you keep your system energized, because you have to have the electrons flowing at all times. And by having that base load that is constant, there is not outages. It's very, very smooth compared to other types of generation assets. We have a lot less of a risk of it than many other states. The other reasons, we have peaker plants around, and peaker plants are, little natural gas turbines in essence that can be deployed at given times if they end up needing to have additional resources. The technology has gotten so advanced to where you can detect these outages from coming, deploy these resources, and the switchgear that goes into that is in fractions of a second. And so you have, I would say we're in a very good place to where we don't have issues of having blackouts. What we do have issues of is we've had such intense growth over the last few years, and it's projected to continue. And for example, if you look at SRP's grid, and we've worked with the public and a lot of stakeholders to put together a comprehensive plan of what does it look like in 10 years. And the end of the day, we figured that it's going to double or triple the total capacity necessary to sustain the economic development and growth that's happening in the current rate. Now, what that means is all the infrastructure that's been put in the last 120 years is suddenly going to need to double or triple in 5 to 10 years, which is a massive endeavor, because think about, transmission and distribution of electricity. You can think about it like in a water pipe or a highway. You can only flow so much at one time. And then eventually, if you end up needing more there, you end up with a traffic jam. You can't get it through. And those are the cases where you would end up with blackouts. And that's why you then try to say, okay, we put a peaker plant there. Can we build some solar here? And I think, and utilities like both SRP, APS, and TEP throughout Arizona are very committed to trying to utilize solar and storage in areas where you can deploy the necessary regional needs of the grid. Now, that's in a long way of saying you're always somewhat susceptible, but we are in probably one of the best positions, especially with weather, things like that. We don't have major storms. We don't have tornadoes. We don't have hurricanes. It does get hot, and that's, of course, an issue. But all those factors put in, we're in a very good place.
Okay. Well,
the only thing that would happen is the price would go up. If we end up not preparing well enough, and then you have to just deploy upgrades to all of this infrastructure in a very short period of time, that's going to cause a huge amount of capital expenditures coming from the utility organizations that is going to have to be rectified in some way, which in essence would end up being rate increases. So that's why, we spend a lot of time trying to navigate and get ahead of the problem, work with customers so that we can find means without having that burden be too great.
So do you feel like, because I heard you say two things that maybe could be contradictory. I heard you say we're good, we're stable. And at the same time, I heard, and we have to double or triple within 10 years. How are we going to?
Well, but that includes allowing for the continued growth. If you end up in a position where the grid cannot handle it, then we wouldn't be able to bring in large scale data centers or large scale microprocessor plants and other types of large users. We wouldn't be able to have massive amounts of housing developments. It's mostly, when I say that, it's that if we want to continue the strong economic development that we've seen recently on into the next decade, therein lies how we need to find that. So we're, from a vantage point of just, are we at risk of trouble? No. Are we at risk of, if we don't continue to focus on solutions for the future and recognize that the future is going to be a significant amount more usage, we will then end up in trouble to where businesses will not be able to come. Then we won't be able to attract more people that would be working at those businesses, increase tax, continue to pay the infrastructure down the road. That's sort of what I'm.
Does Gilbert have, this might be a stupid question, does Gilbert have a lot of land left to develop?
No, Gilbert has a lot of infill. Standard development as we've known it in Gilbert over the past 20 years was you buy somebody's farm that's hundreds of acres, you do a master development that includes commercial pieces, houses, all of it. That type of what's called greenfield development is all but gone. There's a number of large swaths where they're trying to put in some, hybrid commercial multifamily, like think of Epicenter, things like that, that I think a lot of people very much enjoy because it brings great restaurants and nightlife and, just family activities. So there's a number of large, when I say large, you have 40-ish acres, but for the most part, you're going to end up with developments of a smaller scale trying to be put into smaller pockets of land throughout the town. And that's what's called infill. And so, development wise, there still is a lot of opportunity, but that opportunity is vastly different than that we've seen in the past 2 decades.
Okay. And when that development happens, a company wants to come in, do they help pay for the infrastructure needed?
Yeah. Yeah, there's impact fees is what it's called. And so if you're coming in and you're adding a certain number of, if it's multifamily or whatever it is, you're going to have trips on the road. You'll have to then account for that. You have to also account for if you have water mains and sewer mains that have to run down a road where they're currently not, that's a developer's responsibility. And then the associated roadway and things like that leading to it would be that in essence becomes usually dedicated as a public right of way and then becomes an asset of the town. So yeah, there is the infrastructure and the ability to be, and if you're putting in the electrical needs, that comes on the customer as well. You have to be able to put your transformers in that allow for you to utilize that. So that is a pass through in most cases. There is some sharing elements of that to where the town may say, we wanted to expand this road anyway, you can then do this and we'll, you can have a turn lane. And by doing that, you have to move it to here, stuff like that. But they do have to pay for what it'll take to get them in.
Okay. What else do you want the voters to know about you as a candidate?
Well, for myself, the hardest thing for me is that I try to think, how do I actually get out and reach people? It's no longer just, okay, you can send some Facebook ads because there's a small demographic. Well, it's large, but smaller that live that, then people are on TikTok, then people are on Instagram, then there's still people that read the newspaper. So there's no longer this one medium where you go out. And I just want people to meet me and say, hey, look, this guy's been volunteering in positions at the town, for nearly a decade. And the reason that I'm running is primarily because here in 2024, which everybody knows is going to be a contentious election year, of course, because why not? And Arizona is actually on track to spend the second most of all states. And that's second only to California, that happens to be, a top 10 world economy in and of itself, which tells you the magnitude of outside money that's being dumped into our state to try to influence us to get other people their soapbox to stand on, in essence. And as a local person, the reason that I'm running is because I felt my qualifications would allow me the ability to win and to beat that. And that I am really just a father, an engineer, businessman that lives here in Gilbert and has been volunteering and wants to continue to do that on the council in the capacity that the voters of Gilbert would want.
I like it. That sounds really good. So how are you planning to get the word out between now and July?
Yeah, so I'm trying to get some events set up. We politicians do these meet and greets where you try to invite certain, people, whether it's in, you try to find representatives of teachers or realtors, you have your police and fire, both of whom, have backed me as a candidate, which is awesome. And then you have other groups, whether it's, different segments of the town, if you're up northwest corridor or you're over in the Agritopia area or you're down south in, all these different areas. I got to try to get out and I got to try to meet with people and just talk to them and find out what their needs are. Because I think it's also of paramount importance to meet people that you normally would not. It's one thing for me to go to all the areas that I currently go to and talk to people and hear them go, oh yeah, that's great. I know what they want. I talk to them all the time. What I need to do is I need to get out to people that are nothing like me, whether that's, in any demographic, race, religion, job, whatever it is. Those are the people you need to hear from, and you need to say, hey, what do you see? What are the problems you have? What's great about it? And there's a lot of things that people agree on. One of the things that there was a study done recently, well, a couple years ago, and I forget the name. I was in this fellowship called the Flynn Brown Fellowship at the Arizona Center for Civic Leadership this last year. A lot of great people, and the idea is that it's a bipartisan effort. But there was an organization that had done a survey of all Arizona residents, going from the deepest red to the deepest blue pockets. And instead of asking questions in the way that it would normally be politically placed at people, they just ask questions. What do you think of this? And on nearly all of these major issues, 80+% of people agreed. And so the beauty of Gilbert is that it's a nonpartisan race. We don't have to sit and deal with that. We can actually just talk about what do we want. And we're all human beings, we're all citizens of Gilbert, and we all have a voice. And we all pretty much agree on a lot of things if we really get down to it. We just have to ask the right questions.
I love that. I already told you I'm a registered independent. I think that politics gets in the way of a lot of really good problem solving, and I am loving the fact that I get to talk to other Gilbert residents about how they want to solve the same problems that we're all seeing. So that makes me
Yeah.
very happy. Thank you for running. If people want to get involved or learn more about you, where should they go?
Well, I have, on the social media, the handle, I have a Facebook, which is paltry to say the least. I am not the greatest at social media, but I did create it and I intend to populate it. And Instagram, it's all Mundt for Gilbert, MUNDTFORGILBERT. And then I have a website as well. It's mundtforgilbert.com. And Gmail is mundtforgilbert@gmail. I tried to make it simple. My name is all over it. And please reach out. First, I need friends on social media, and second, I'd love to hear and learn more from the community.
That's great. That's great. Thank you
Now,
so
I'm not
much.
going to get any likes without any friends.
Oh, I appreciate your time and getting to know you. Really appreciate it. And we will talk again soon.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Billy.
Okay, so to my editing team, I need you to take this next section and cut it back into the other part before we end. And I'll do a new closing for you too, so you can cut out the old closing, okay? All right, we're gonna wait 5 seconds and then we're gonna get back in. You mentioned that Gilbert Fire and Police have endorsed you. That is especially interesting to me because Kenny Buckland, one of your competitors, was a 20-year Gilbert police commander.
Right.
Are
Yeah.
and are you the only candidate that they're endorsing?
To my knowledge, thus far, yes. I believe that the fire said that they were going to also endorse Monty Lyons, me and him and I. But from a police perspective, I have not heard other than myself who they were going to endorse. So I don't know for certain whether or not, but it was not, it didn't come out right away saying, hey, it's you and Kenny.
So you don't know if he's also endorsed, or you do know that he is not endorsed?
I don't know for 100%. I don't think that they did, but I don't have that 100%. So I don't want to speak to that. But I would have, it seemed as though it would have been a very easy fit. And it was interesting that, they didn't just come out and say, yeah, we like you and Kenny. So I honestly don't know where that stands, but, it wasn't something that was right away apparent that they were. So that, it might mean they're not.
How do you get that endorsement?
Well, you have to meet with some of the, their union representatives, and they talk about, what's going on with, either organization. You have to then explain to them your policies and procedures and things of that nature. And if they find that you are one of the candidates that would be of the best interest, not only to the town, but to the interests of, whether it's firefighters or officers, and understanding and being empathetic towards them, I guess that would be, where they would lean.
Okay. Do you know if you don't know if their lack of endorsement has anything to do with his relationship to the goons?
No, I don't know. Like I said, I don't really know exactly that whether or not he's actually, but I don't, it's never been told to me, hey, we can't do it because of something like that. It was just that I had gone through and met with their, union reps and things, and we talked about kind of the future, what we see, and, a lot of the issues that are facing them, with hiring and, the difficulty in finding new officers, the people that actually want to do the job, which is even harder. And, so they brought that stuff up, and that was kind of where they then said that they had said, yeah, we'll endorse you. But at that time, they hadn't come right out and said, no, it's someone else. And I also, it may be that Monty Lyons is also endorsed by them, but I don't have that affirmative as it stands.
Okay. All right. So I had a question. What is it? Oh, yeah. I want to know, what is it that you would do in terms of policy for police or fire? How would you support them?
I think that it's mostly that I would, in our conversations, it was mostly saying that I understand that the issues that they're having. They have a lot of issues with, like I said, hiring people. The salary that they're able to pay is lower than a lot of other local jurisdictions. The other, like Queen Creek, offers $8,000 or $9,000 bonus that we don't.
Wow.
So you end up with, the policemen from other communities that actually live in Gilbert is much more sizable than even just the force of Gilbert.
Wow.
And so, just in talking and saying, yeah, that sounds like an issue and we really need to work to figure that out, was, I think, one of the reasons that, led them to like me. I don't know. I mean, maybe it was just that I'm, just such a nice guy too, but, and good looking. But that's less.
It's your good hair.
Yeah. Yeah. I did leave it a little longer for you. Yeah.
It does sound to me like a theme is that Gilbert might have a revenue problem.
Yeah. Well, I think any town or city clearly is going to always be in that position of, okay, we need to figure this out. But given what's happened recently with, like I said, the rental tax being eliminated, all of the other inflation that's happened all around, where people are shopping, what shopping they're able to do in Gilbert that they might be doing elsewhere. All of these things are contributing factors to, budgetarily speaking, there's going to be difficult decisions. That's where I've always said, I don't have any podium to stand on and yell, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to solve this problem, or I've done this. I have worked on large scale budgets. And, when we did that bonding, we did the green bonds in 2018 to pay for the upgrades to the water treatment system at the time. We sold $500 million of green bonds that helped to fund that. And, so I understand these things. It's not always sugarcoating. Sometimes it's just dealing with the problem. And I think everybody knows there's going to be big questions about how do we afford, what do we do, where does that happen? And public input should be a huge part of that too, as well as astute leadership, I think.
I really appreciate the transparency and the honesty, because that makes sense. These are hard problems that are going to take a while to grapple with, and then decisions are going to have to be made. And it sounds very real. And so I very much appreciate that. And if you all have enjoyed this episode of the podcast, please make sure to download it, like it, share it with your friends. If you are a Gilbert voter, make sure you get your ballot. And make sure your friends get their ballot, because everybody needs to vote. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks so much for listening to the Modern Divorce Podcast. Remember, anything you've heard today or anything you read online is not the replacement for actual consultation with an attorney and does not create an attorney-client relationship. Even if you called in and we spoke to you, you were anonymous and we don't have your details and you have not become a client of Modern Law. However, we would love to speak with you, or you should seek out the advice of legal counsel or counseling or any other expert near you. And if you have an idea for a show topic or you need to speak with an attorney in Arizona, you can reach me at info@mymodernlaw.com.